Hey up everyone, back for another tutorial, and this one's going to be about how I paint eyes using acrylic. Some of you will recognise Nugget the French Bulldog from a previous full painting time-lapse that I uploaded a few weeks ago, but if you've not seen that and you want to watch it, I'll put a video link above and then you can go and watch that if you want to as well. Meanwhile, this tutorial will just focus on how I did the actual eyes. So first step is just getting paint onto paper, so I'm just going to start by adding some main features at eyes using black paint like rims at eyes and pupils and things like that. And I'm using a number 6 I think round brush for this. It's a little bit big for like details, but at this point I'm just trying to get paint on, so it don't really matter about whether they're super tidy or out like that at this stage. I'll do all that tidying up later on. I've added a bit of water to this paint. You'll see it's not particularly black, it's a little bit transparent because it is a bit watery. It just makes it easier to apply to paper during these earlier stages when you're putting it onto blank paper. And I'll darken everything up when I add more layers on. So now you'll see that I just add another layer to what I've already put on just to make it a little bit more black. You'll notice that I have done some more work on Rested Dog. I just cut all that footage out for this. I didn't do the eyes all separate, I just did them along with everything else, so you'll keep seeing Rested Dog progress as I'm going along through video. Just adding a little bit of colour on irises here. It don't particularly matter about how tidy it is or whether colour's exactly correct or it should be, because all that's going to be developed later. So now you can see I'm adding some more black to black areas, but this time I'm just being that little bit more careful to try and get a little bit more shape to eyes. Tidying them up ever so slightly. I'm still using my number 6 round brush for this, but I'm just being a little bit more steady with it this time. And now I've come in with a rigger brush. I think this is a number 2 or 3 or something like that. I need a little bit more precision now, so I've changed brushes to a rigger. And I'm just starting to refine the shape of eyes a little bit and add a few extra little details. You can see a little bit of sclera on the eyes on this dog. And you've seen me just paint that in there. Just refining rims at eyes so the shape is a little bit more defined. Just using corner at rigger brush here, I just flatten the bristles and then use the corner to get a more precise line when I'm doing this kind of work. What look like the pupils are not actually just the pupil. You can't tell at this stage, but when you get dogs that have got pale eyes like this, they always have a ring of darker colour directly around your pupil. So they have a ring of like dark brown just around your pupil, and then the iris turns the paler colour around the outer edges. So basically pupils are just smaller spots in the middle of them dark blobs that are there currently. Because there were quite a lot of light shining on this dog, its pupils would have been quite constricted at that time to stop too much light from getting in. I've switched to a smaller round brush now. I can't remember the size of it, but it's possibly like a number 2 or 3 or something like that. And I'm just adding some paint to the lighter part iris. The edges of that blob, which is actually the brown part of the iris, I'm just blurring that into the light part of the iris. It's not like a sharp graduation between them, it's a little bit more blurred. I'm just adding some darker areas onto this iris on this side because it's not all lit up like it is on the other side. There's just going to be certain sections that are really glowing from the light that's hitting it from that side, but it's not as direct as the sunlight that's obviously coming in a window or whatever it is. That's hitting the other eye and lighting it all up. So back to this eye again, and now I'm going to add a pupil. Because of the way that the light is hitting the eye, it makes the pupil actually look blue rather than black. This is probably caused by the light passing through the matter inside the eye, the vitreous humour and the aqueous humour. I'm using processed cyan as the blue of choice for this. You'll notice it now actually looks darker than the brown that's around it. Before it just looked like a black blob, and now you can see that it's definitely brown with this really dark blue pupil in the middle. But I'm going to lighten that brown slightly, just a little bit more. The edges of the brown ring are never totally even, so you've always got some little bits that stick out in an uneven fashion. And then you also tend to get some brown tones right around the rim of the eye on the outside. I'm hoping that you can see this well enough, because with my current lenses I can't really zoom right in, which probably would be beneficial at this stage. So now I'm just going to start and lighten this pupil a little bit more. You can see blues appearing a little bit more now as well. I'm using processed cyan with some black. And then I'm going to darken around edges of this pupil and have it a little bit more cloudy in the middle. So I'll just add a little bit of white in for that. And then the darker tone, I'll start using a little bit around edge of eye, because it's nice and dark for them shadowed bits. Just lighten the middle of that pupil even more. I've also added a little bit near top iris, because some of the dog's eyelashes are casting a shadow just on top of iris on that side. And now I'll start lightening up the yellow part of iris gradually. You'll notice the eyelid on that side looks a lot thicker than on the other side, but it's not all the actual eyelid. Part of that dark area on top of eye there is actually shadow that's being cast right on top of iris by the eyelid, because of the direction that the light's coming from, which is probably from a little bit higher than what the light coming from other side is. So on other side it's coming from slightly lower, even though there's less light there, and it's not casting a shadow on the top of eye because it's coming from a lower angle. So the eyelid looks thinner on that side than it does on the side that I'm working on now. It's difficult to see, especially from this distance, that there is some detail in that eyelid on underside. It's quite dark, so you can't see it very well, but you can see where the iris stops and the eyelid starts. You've got to try and retain like a blurred effect when you're getting the transition between that dark brown part of your iris into your bright yellow part of your iris. It can be a little bit tricky to do in acrylics. I'd use a bit more water and flow improver. I might just put some water on its own and then put the paint on, which then bleeds out into like a blurred effect. That can work quite often on when I'm doing irises. When you put your brightest parts of your iris, when you're putting the lightest highlights on it, try and keep them to centre so that the edges between the edge of eye and the part where it meets the brown part of iris is just that little bit darker. And I'll also line the outer edge of eye with some darker colour, like a reddish brown quite often, where the iris meets the sclera. There's often just a tiny little bit of reddy coloured brown or something like that, or if you've got blue-eyed dogs it would be darker blue, and that just goes right around edge of eye, just a tiny little bit between the iris and the sclera, which is the white part of the eye. And then the fleshy part on the inner corner eye, which you can see because there's a lot of light shining on it, it's showing up quite red in reference photo, probably because there's a lot of blood vessels in that area. Just doing some little radial strokes, because when you look closely at an iris, you'll see like a radial pattern from your pupil to the outer part of your iris. They're not usually like dead smooth. You've usually got like little muscles like come out in like a radial circle. And it's a case of just keep working all this until it looks the way that you want it to look. Every eye is going to be different in the way that it catches the light, the colour of it, the shape of it. I'm just starting to add a few little light reflections in that pupil. These were a couple of like lesser reflections, probably from something that were in environment nearby and just reflecting some light. I'll brighten up that sclera. Add a few points of light where you've got some light hitting what is probably moisture around edges of eyes. Can create some like little bubbles and what have you around edge of eyes there on that inner corner. Sometimes when I paint something on and it looks a little bit bright and brash, I might just dab it with my finger and it just tones it down that little bit. Works quite well with quite a lot of things. I used it on the muzzle of this dog a lot as well to get the skin texture on the muzzle. The brightest parts of this iris might be almost white, even though the iris is yellow on that bright part. Where the light hits it the most, it's going to be almost white with just a very slight bit of yellow hue in it, because the light that's coming from that side is quite intense. You don't want to cover the whole iris, well, the yellow part of it anyway, in the brightest colours. You just want to dab it around the centre of the yellow band. And then I'll redefine the dark edges. I'll start adding the shadows that are being created by this dog's eyelashes. You can't really see the eyelashes themselves, but you can see they're casting a shadow on the top part of that iris. And I decided here that the pupil needed brightening up a little bit more. So I've added some more blue tones with processed cyan. When it comes to painting realistic eyes, you've just got to take your time and just keep working it until it looks the way that you want it to look. There's no point in trying to rush it when you want it to look like really realistic and get that glassy effect. Just painting the little highlights on the iris between the shadows that's been cast by them eyelashes. And then back to pupil. This is where it really changes everything. When you add the final highlight, it just completely transforms the eye from being dead to being alive. You put that highlight on and it just changes everything. So don't worry about your eyeball perhaps looking a little bit lifeless until you add that highlight on at the end. So over to other eye again now, and first thing I'm going to do is, same as before, just tidying your eye up where you've got your black areas like your rim and your pupil, well the pupil and the inner part of iris, which just looks all really dark, especially on this side because it's not going to be as brightly lit as the other side. Just making sure I get shape of that eye correct now. I'm using a knot round brush on this part, I think. On this side, because it's not so brightly lit, your sclera is not going to look as bright white as what it is on the other side, and you can see some red tones from your blood vessels and things like that. If I accidentally go over the rim at eye whilst I'm painting other details, then I just go back over the rims at eyes afterwards and put them back in place again. It's easy enough to do with acrylic because you can just keep layering it up. Now I'll start adding some highlights to that iris. The top and bottom of the iris on this side are not highlighted, they're quite dark, and it's just the sides and certain sections that have really caught the light that's coming from that side. I'll brighten that sclera up a little bit more and add some pink tones. And then I'll move back to that pupil and the inner part of iris. Start adding your first impressions of reflections going on there. And then just correct rim eye as well underneath that sclera, because you can often smudge onto things like that when you're painting little details. Then in goes the reflections. I always like to add some bluish tones to these. I generally use processed cyan and ultramarine, often mix them together as well, and have some black and white in there so it's not too blue. Just because of where that light's shining on this eye, the graduation between the dark brown ring and the yellow iris is a little bit sharper on this side. And then again, you can see what a transformation it makes as soon as you add them highlights. You just put the highlights in and it just looks like a completely different eye. Goes from being dead to alive. And then there's another little highlight on the inner corner as well. Just going to fuzz the edges of that darker centre just that little bit. Just makes it look more authentic. And then just add some bright yellow tones just to give that iris a little bit of extra punch there. And then obviously that last highlight is almost bright white, it's just got slight yellow tone in there. I think I used some lemon yellow for that, along with some white mixed in. Then back to highlights, just one little dotty highlight there. I'll tidy that bottom rim eye up a little bit where I smudged over it slightly. As you can see, I just added a little bit of grey onto that dark area and it was just a bit too bright, so I just dabbed it a couple of times with my finger just to tone it down a little bit, and then it looks fine. And the dark area right at the bottom of that iris there just needed to be darkened down a little bit more as well. And then just tidy that sclera up just that little bit. The highlights on this lower eyelid on this side have got quite a lot of blue tones in them because of the light that's coming from that side. Creates a lot of blue tones on that side at dog in general, compared to your much warmer tones, your off whites with your slight yellow tones on the other side. Adding these blues and things like that just gives it a lot more depth. Otherwise they can look a little bit flat and lifeless. And I'm just using that number 0 round brush just to tidy things up and get rid of any little mistakes and smudges and things like that, and just keep refining it until it looks the way it should look. And I think that's just about done for eyes. So I hope this tutorial were helpful to you. If you got something out of it, please give my video a like and subscribe if you've not already. I'm always glad for people to leave feedback in comments, any suggestions on how I can improve things and what kind of tutorials you'd like to see next. So I think that's going to be it for now then, so I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye!